Good afternoon. My name is Ces Butner, and I have the honor to serve as this year's president of the Rotary Club of Oakland. Founded in 1908, the Rotary Club of Oakland is the third oldest Rotary Club of some 35,000 Rotary clubs throughout the world. We are a community of 300 men and women from all walks of Oakland civic, commercial, and community life, committed to the Rotary motto of service above self. I'd like to welcome you to our 5,336th club meeting. For over 111 years, we have welcomed Rotarians and guests from around the world to our club meetings. We continue to do so virtually, so if you're a visiting Rotarian, or if you're a guest of a Rotarian, please let us know by typing your name and the name of the club into the chat box located in the center bottom of your screen, as indicated by the red arrow on the slide you're viewing now. By doing so, we will be able to recognize you later in this meeting. Also, we recommend that all participants view the Zoom meeting by clicking the speaker view button located in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. And if you have comments throughout the meeting or questions for the speakers, please use the chat button at the bottom of the screen for that as well. And now for our thought for today, Rotarian Jesse Schmidt.
Thank you, President Ces. Good afternoon, Rotarians and guests. Today for our thought of the day, I have a concept and a quote for you. So the concept is called the 5-second rule, and you may have heard of it before. It's by Mel Robbins, and this is not about 5 seconds to pick food up off the floor. This is when you come across a strong emotional reaction in yourself, take 5 seconds, a 5-second pause to I got muted, to become aware of what you're feeling. And in that 5 seconds, you have a little bit of time to reassess if the response that you're going to be going through is the proper response. And I'm going to give you a quote. This comes from Viktor Frankl, who, if you know a little bit about him, he was the psychologist. He's the author of A Man's Search for Meaning, and he lived through multiple internment camps during the Holocaust. He says, between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse, for setting the tone for our meeting. Because we want to remain grounded and focused, we begin our meetings by jointly reciting our vision, which is, together, we see a world where people unite and take action to create lasting change across the globe, in our communities, and in ourselves. I hope you enjoyed last week's meeting. This week, though, we've got a fantastic meeting. We got General McMaster, one of our great national security advisors in the past, is going to speak to us today about exactly what's going on with our foreign policy and all. And I hope you'll enjoy it. So I want you to sit back and get ready for us. It'll take care of most of our meeting. I want you to sit back and just enjoy another of our great Civic Thursday meetings, which is on Wednesday today, where you can catch a great speaker and get involved with Rotary, where service above self exists. Past District Governor Ed Jelen, do we have any visiting Rotarians or guests?
Indeed we do, President Ces. Good to see you. First, visiting us from the Walnut Creek Club and our at the invitation of David Stein, we have Joe Fenolio, who is the CEO of the Golden Gate Area Boy Scouts. And so, Joe, nice to have you with us and welcome. Let's see who else we have out there. Jack McAvoy brought Harlan Hirschfield with him today. So welcome, Harlan. And Keith Uriarte brought Kathy Jackson-Gent, who is the CEO of Global Investment Company and Opportunity Zone Investment. So welcome to all our guests. So nice to have you with us.
Great. We have quite a few guests in today. Thank you, Ed. And welcome all the guests. Do we have Rotarian and past president Carla Betts in the house today? Carla, are you there? No, she hasn't joined us as of yet. All right. I was just going to give her an opportunity to toot her horn about a very exciting award she received recently. But we'll save that for another time, and we'll have the bell ringers for that. I'd like to introduce Mike Mowery from our Oakland Rotary Endowment. He's going to speak to us today about a little bit about the Oakland Rotary Endowment campaign this year.
Thank you, President Sess. As many know, I'm this year I'm honored to be the president of the Oakland Rotary Endowment. I'm filling in today for Jim Camponegro, who is our campaign committee chair. This is the month of our annual campaign, and during this month we're trying to highlight the beneficiaries of ORE funding, including many of our committees and other nonprofits in our community. ORE is able to do this because of the generosity of all of our club members in supporting ORE. As Sess has noted, he is, and many of you know, he is generously matching up to $50,000 for all donations to ORE during our campaign. So if you have given already to the campaign, thank you so much. If you have not, we would ask you to consider a gift to our ORE today or this month. And I've lost my screen, but I think we have a thermometer showing where we stand so far with the campaign. There we are. And so what I'd like to do now is actually introduce one of the beneficiaries of ORE grants. I'd like to introduce Donald Frazier, who is the Executive Director of Building Opportunities for Self-Sufficiency, BOSS, AKA BOSS. BOSS has received a couple grants from ORE over the last few years, and that have been proposed by the Community Service Committee. And I think there may be one more in the offing. So at this point, let me turn it over to Donald Frazier.
Thank you, Mike. And good morning, everyone. My name is Donald Frazier. As was stated, I'm the Executive Director of Building Opportunities for Self-Sufficiency, also known as BOSS. BOSS has been around for 50 years in Alameda County. I came on board in 2013 after a long-term executive director retired. Her name was Bunachima. Some of you may know of her. And over the past 8 years, we've created an expansion of our service structure. So BOSS was known for housing and homeless services, and we expanded our mission to include reentry and violence prevention, in addition to social justice programming. So we developed solutions to mass homelessness, mass incarceration, and community violence with programs and services tailored to meet the needs of the people we serve. And our geographical footprint is Berkeley, Oakland, Hayward, and now San Leandro. And in Oakland specifically, we have a safe haven program on San Pablo Avenue. We have our housing, permanent supportive housing on Telegraph in West Grand. We call it Rosa Parks House. And we have four reentry hubs, right? We call them neighborhood impact hubs, located downtown Oakland at 1600 San Pablo, West Oakland at 2811 Adeline, and East Oakland at 90th and MacArthur Boulevard. And those impact hubs is where our reentry and violence prevention work occurs. And we intentionally place these impact hubs in West and East Oakland because that's where the majority of crime and violence occur. And we're trying to expand, specifically in East Oakland, more impact hubs in certain neighborhoods where stressor beats, which are identified by Oakland Police Department. We want to be in those communities with resources for the community. We have received several grants, 2 grants specifically from Oakland Rotary. And one was for a van for our Rain Tree programs, our career training and employment program that we made really good use out of, and thank you very much. The second grant was for an entrepreneurship program where we were developing the population that we deal with. These are folks who are formerly incarcerated, and some have serious barriers to getting mainstream employment. And some of them are interested in starting their own business. And so Oakland Rotary granted us funds to start this program. And lo and behold, COVID hit last March as we were developing the program. And we were going to do it virtually, and it was a little challenging to do a virtual entrepreneurship program. And we could certainly, because what we were going to do as folks would put in an application for it, we'd connect them with the business coach. The business coach would help them create a business plan. Then they would pitch the business plan. And we were going to have an individual from the Oakland Rotary, someone from Alameda County, someone from the business community, and they would pitch their idea, and they would win the funds for their idea. But we had to slow that down, but hopefully COVID is easing up, and we can get right back into that entrepreneurship program and have some good results to report back. And I think I had 5 minutes, and I want to believe my 5 minutes is up. I tried to talk as fast as I could, and hopefully you got a good understanding around who we are and what we do.
Thank you, Donald. That's just one of the things that your Oakland Rotary Endowment funds that we raised during this campaign this month will help support organizations like BOSS. We have many other things that we support all along, and those all turn good. So if you haven't given your gift, make sure you do it this month or today. Thank you so much. Mike, did you have any more about that? Nope. All right, I got Dudley wants to talk about the gala, which is the culmination. After we get through with the campaign, we'll have the gala event, and that's in May. Dudley, you got the stage.
Thank you, President Sess. Yes, this year we're going to end our campaign for ORE with a celebration and another opportunity to give. So over this month, you'll hear a little bit about the beginnings of we'll have a casino night. It's May 22nd. Actually, the buying the tickets just went live. You can go on to the website, but you'll hear more about that over the next few weeks. In getting ready for this, what we really need now are sponsors for the event, and we'll have 3 types of sponsorship. As you can see here, we have 3. We have platinum, gold, and silver. Platinum and gold will get you 2 private rooms. We'll get you a private room for the event where you can invite with a platinum sponsorship. You get 8 tickets for your guests. With a gold membership, you get 4 tickets for your room. And with a silver sponsorship, you get 2 tickets, plus lots of other good stuff. But we really encourage anybody who has the ability and willingness to be a sponsor for this event. I welcome you. You can get hold of me, Christine Watson, or Kathleen Williams are the leaders of this event, and we'll be actually contacting many people to offer you this opportunity. We're also beginning to look for live auction items, and there's a group that is starting to promote that as well. But we welcome you to join us, and whether or not you are a sponsor, we really want you to come to our event on May 22nd. Thank you, Seth.
Thank you, Dudley. May 22nd, put it in your calendar. Make sure you don't miss it. It's casino night, the grand gala for this year. And that's the way we'll conclude our Oakland Rotary Endowment campaign. Now today, we have past President and Speakers Committee Chair David Stein. Will you do us the honor of introducing this week's Civic Thursday speaker on Wednesday? Thank you, David.
President Sess, fellow Rotarians and guests, it's my great honor today to introduce our speaker, General H.R. McMaster. And before I do so, I want to take just a moment to thank you, General McMaster, for your service both in and out of uniform to our country, and to recognize those in our club who have served our country in uniform. So thanks to all of you who have done so. What is the role of the U.S. in the world? What should the tenets be of America's foreign policy? What are the chief international threats facing the United States today? Our speaker today has been faced with these questions and many more for many years. General H.R. McMaster is a fellow at both the Hoover Institution and the Freeman Spogli Institute, and a lecturer at the Graduate School of Business at Stanford University. He's a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point. General McMaster served as a commissioned officer in the United States Army for 34 years before retiring as a lieutenant general in June of 2018. He then went on to serve as the 26th Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs. In addition to being an officer in the military, General McMaster has a PhD in American history from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and is the author of 2 books, Dereliction of Duty, Lyndon Johnson, Robert McNamara, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the Lies That Led to Vietnam, and his most recent book, Battlegrounds, The Fight to Defend the Free World. Please join me in giving a warm Oakland Rotary welcome to General H.R. McMaster. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, David. Thanks, President Sess. Hey, thanks to all of you for the privilege of being with you, and thanks for the great work that Rotary does. I'll tell you, I think you are more important to our country, to our communities than ever, especially at this time when we see these sort of centripetal forces pulling us apart from each other, diminishing our confidence in who we are as a people and in our common identity as Americans, and also doubts about our agency, our ability to improve our lives and to build a better world for generations to come. That's what you do every day. And it's a real privilege to be with those of you who have committed yourselves to making your community stronger and to bringing Americans together around a common agenda of helping each other out and building stronger communities. So thank you so much for the privilege of being with you. What I'd like to do is just make some brief comments up front and then see where you'd like to take the conversation. I'm really interested in hearing from you. And of course, what's in the news these days is the news that we're going to withdraw completely from Afghanistan on September 11th. Sadly, that date was picked. I don't know why, of this year, 20 years after we first entered into that conflict in response to the most devastating terrorist attack in history on September 11th, 2001. And what I'd like to do is maybe place that decision in a little bit of context, very broad context, and without hopefully oversimplifying too much, and address this question of what is our role in the world, and whether or not the United States is capable these days of implementing a sustained, reasoned approach to foreign policy and to national security. And I think that we ought to begin maybe with the end of the Cold War. And this is how I begin my book, Battlegrounds, is a little memoir of my time in the 2nd Cavalry Regiment patrolling the East-West German border on the day that East Germany lifted travel restrictions to the West. And our cavalry troopers went from one moment staring down East German border guards to the next moment seeing the gates thrown open. And then tens, and then hundreds, and then thousands, and then tens of thousands of East Germans pouring across that border, bearing bouquets of flowers and bottles of wine for our soldiers. I mean, there were hugs and tears of joy, right? The Cold War was over. People were reunited. The East German government faded away, and the Soviet Union broke apart. And that was followed quite soon thereafter, about almost exactly a year after, by our deployment, our cavalry troops deployment to Saudi Arabia, to defend Saudi Arabia, and then to conduct an attack into Iraq and Kuwait, to free Kuwait, give Kuwait back to the Kuwaitis. And that resulted in a lopsided military victory over the fourth largest army in the world. And these two events, I think, generated a high degree of optimism. I mean, not without reason, but I think that optimism in the early 1990s turned into over-optimism. And that over-optimism bled complacency. And that complacency then was tainted by a touch of hubris in this period around, I think, three interconnected assumptions about what that post-Cold War world was going to be and what America's role was going to be in that post-Cold War world. And the first of these assumptions was that there was an arc of history that had guaranteed the primacy of our free and open societies over closed authoritarian systems, right? Ideological competition was over. We'd won. The second and related assumption was that great power competition and rivalry was a relic of the past. I mean, you might recall when then Secretary Kerry was responding to Russia's annexation of Crimea, invasion of Ukraine, he said, well, that's so 19th century. There was this idea, right, that these kind of competitions were now passé. And then, of course, related to that was the idea that our technological military prowess would guarantee our security going forward. That if any foe had the temerity to challenge the United States, that fight would be fast, cheap, efficient, waged from standoff range. This is sort of the orthodoxy associated with this idea of a revolution in military affairs, right? That we would have achieved overmatch, or dominance was the big word at the time. How's that for an arrogant word, right? Over any adversaries and enemies. And this was all a setup, I think, in the 1990s. It was a setup for disappointments and strategic shocks in the 2000s, beginning, of course, with that most devastating terrorist attack in history, the mass murder of nearly 3,000 innocents on September 11th, 2001, when Al-Qaeda, who we didn't take seriously, when they declared war on the United States, we didn't take seriously when they went during the first World Trade Center bombings, 93, I think it was, that we didn't take seriously really when they bombed our embassies in Africa and just fired a few cruise missiles and called it a day. Well, what Al-Qaeda did is they used box cutters and airplanes to circumvent our military prowess and to inflict that devastating loss on our country, killing, as I mentioned, nearly 3,000 innocents and taking trillions of dollars out of the U.S. economy. Then, of course, we have the long and costly wars in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and Iraq, and I think we always want to debate, should we have done it? It being the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Hey, I think we ought to debate more. Who the heck thought it would be easy, and why did they think it would be easy? And I think some people thought it would be easy in both wars because they thought, again, this revolution in military affairs would deliver quick victory. But what they neglected is they neglected continuities, in the very nature of war. The war is an extension of politics. That war is human. People fight for the same reasons Thucydides identified 2,500 years ago. War is uncertain because of a continuous interaction with an enemy. The future course of events doesn't depend on what we decide to do. It depends on that interaction. And then finally, war is indeed a contest of wills. And our emphasis on change and the promise associated with new technologies and this idea that really this next war is going to be fundamentally different from all those that have gone before it, bias change at the expense of continuity. And as the historian Carl Becker said, he said that memory of past and anticipation of future should walk hand in hand in a happy way, without one disputing primacy over the other. And so these shocks and disappointments, I think they resulted in a shift of the impetus behind the emotional impetus behind foreign policy from over-optimism and a touch of hubris to pessimism and almost resignation, and a belief after 2008 and the financial crisis in particular that our disengagement from complex problem sets abroad was an unmitigated good. And you can see this attitude and the consequences in the complete withdrawal from Iraq in December 2011, when, of course, then Vice President Biden calls President Obama and says, hey, thank you for allowing me to end this war. under the assumption that wars end when one side disengages. And I think you can see it as well with the unenforced red line in Syria after the Syrian regime used chemical weapons to commit mass murder against innocents on a massive scale there. Almost 1,800 people killed and nearly 500 children killed in that attack. So, I think the fundamental cause, though, of our strategic incompetence that we have seen since the end of the Cold War is the same cause is apparent in both approaches to foreign policy. And that cause was what I call in the book strategic narcissism. Again, this tendency to define the world only in relation to us. And I think whereas it is more than fair to say that the George W. Bush administration undervalued and underappreciated the costs and risks of action, I think it is equally fair to criticize the Obama administration for undervaluing the costs and risks of inaction or disengagement. And of course, the Trump administration continued that same approach of belief that disengagement from Syria, although we didn't really leave, and now Afghanistan, a Trump decision continued by the Biden administration, is based on this conceit, this conceit that our adversaries and enemies only have aspirations and goals in relation to us or in reaction to us and what we do. I mean, just consider how profoundly arrogant this is, as if the Taliban, for example, are going to say, well, I guess the Americans are gone. I guess we'll stop fighting now. So I think what we are in danger of is really replicating the mistake we did make in Iraq in 2011 with a military and a diplomatic disengagement from a very fragile situation in Iraq that set conditions for the rise of ISIS. The organization became the most devastating terrorist organization in history in terms of the human suffering that it inflicted on so many, the refugee crisis that it perpetrated, rape camps and child abuse on industrial scale. I think we're to see that in Afghanistan, and it's going to be equally painful to watch this as the Taliban the Taliban claims territory and population centers in Afghanistan and reestablishes the Islamic Emirate. What is, I think, particularly I think disappointing about Afghanistan is in our drive to disengage. We did engage in I think almost an unprecedented degree of self-delusion instead of acknowledging the enemy that we're fighting in Afghanistan, conjuring up the enemy we would prefer, right? An enemy who I guess would implement a much more benign form of Sharia in the country, which I guess is maybe mass executions in the soccer stadium every other Saturday. Maybe that's every other girls' school bulldozed, and the Taliban that it has this bold line right between it and other jihadist terrorist organizations like Al Qaeda, which of course doesn't exist. These groups are intertwined and interconnected. So what do? I think the antidote to strategic narcissism is strategic empathy, and that's what I argue for in the book. Is a concerted effort to view complex challenges abroad from the perspective of others, especially rivals, enemies, and adversaries. And then based on that more realistic appraisal of the nature of the challenges we encounter abroad, to take a competitive approach and to craft reasoned, sustained, and sustainable approaches to foreign policy and to these challenges we face. I believe that the fundamental lesson from 9/11 is a lesson that is analogous to the lesson of COVID-19. And that is that problems and challenges that develop abroad can only be coped with or dealt with at an exorbitant price once they reach our shores. So the book that I wrote is an argument, for sustained engagement with these problems abroad, to do so at a relatively low cost and with burden sharing with partners, like-minded partners globally. So we could talk about anything you'd like. The book that deals with other challenges besides jihadist terrorist threats, Iran, North Korea, and of course what I think is the defining competition of this century, which is the competition with the Chinese Communist Party. So, hey, thanks for the opportunity to be with everybody, and I look forward to hearing what's on your minds.
Well, we've got a lot of questions already. They're starting to pile up in there. So, Susie, are you on? Are you going to handle the questions for us? All right, then I will. Let's see. The first question I see here is let me get down to it. General McMaster, at the end of battlegrounds, you say those who I can't read it there. There I got it. You say those who self-identify as realists are right to be skeptical in international organizations and to promote peace, justice, and prosperity across the globe. How realistic, in your view, are Rotaries, Peace Fellows, and Peace Centers?
Or Rotarians, and what's the last?
Rotaries, Peace Fellows, and Peace Centers. You
Yeah.
may not know about the peace.
Yes. Yeah. I think they're very realistic, right? Because I think that the way for us to be able to overcome these challenges, I think one of the ways is to emphasize our common humanity, right? And to work together with people across all cultures against really who I think are common enemies, right? I think it's really important for us to recognize that those who suffer most from jihadist terrorists are Muslim populations abroad. And so these are the enemies of all civilized peoples. And I think really when I think about the terrorist problem in particular, I think of it as a cycle of ignorance that is used to foment hatred, and then hatred that is used to justify violence against innocents. And I believe to defeat terrorist organizations, they have to be isolated from sources of ideological and emotional and psychological support. And so breaking that cycle, it requires I think education and interaction. I think as we compete with the Chinese Communist Party, for example, we of course have to recognize, right? I mean, China is not monolithic or homogeneous, and we should maximize positive contact with Chinese people and entities that are not acting as an arm of the Chinese Communist Party and acting against our interests. So I think that that Rotary's mission abroad and these sorts of exchanges are more important than ever in the context of this, what some people are calling now great power competition with China, as well as this sustained effort against these modern day barbarians who are the enemies of all civilized peoples.
All right, we got Dudley Thompson asking, the number one priority of Rotary is the eradication of polio. The only cases of wild polio virus are in Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Yeah.
Can you describe what it is like in the small areas of war and resistance to this kind of vaccination campaign?
Well, this relates to this idea, right, of the cycle of ignorance, hatred, and violence. And if you want to sort of, get a window into these, into these tribal areas that are out of the reach of legitimate security forces and authorities, what you see is a terrorist ecosystem that exists on the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, in which these groups gain control of territory and populations. They use that control to recruit young people to their cause, to press them into their cause. They brainwash them, and they systematically dehumanize them. Young people with the worst forms of child abuse, sexual abuse, as well as other forms of abuse. For example, being the leg holder in beheading ceremonies, for example. And this is relatively commonplace. And they're taught to hate, and they're also taught to believe a broad range of conspiracy theories that to direct that hatred outside to others, to believe that if there is destitution in that particular area, that it's due to the Zionist Crusader conspiracy, and that part of that conspiracy is to afflict that particular population and to afflict them with these vaccines, which are really meant to do them harm, and so it's a whole series of lies and disinformation that is aimed at them cynically, by these so-called imams, typically who have a 4th or 5th grade education, and are really at the top of criminalized networks that use violence against innocents for criminal and political agendas. I consider them irreligious people who use a perverted interpretation of religion to cloak their criminal acts in some form of contrived legitimacy, right? So I think that's why you have the problem. You know, when I was a fellow at the Hoover Institution for War College years ago in 2002 to 2003, and I asked for research assistants to applied research assistants, and had a small research budget for a project. And a young Pakistani woman applied. Her name was Sharmeen Obaid, now Sharmeen Obaid Shinoy. And we wrote a paper together on the madrasas, you know, these indoctrination centers in Pakistan, in the frontier regions. She went on to a very distinguished career in film and documentaries. She's an incredibly courageous woman who's now won 2 Oscars. And one of the documentaries she did much earlier, this is dated now, but it's the same problem, is called Children of the Taliban. And it's worth watching, you know, because she was disarming to these terrorist leaders because they tend to dismiss women anyway, right? And she got extraordinary access into some of these sort of, you know, these brainwashing facilities, factories. And it's worth looking at. I think it was carried on PBS.
All right, thank you. General McMaster, do you believe the U.S. response to COVID has jeopardized our security? If yes, in what ways and what could be done to rectify this?
Yeah. Well, it's jeopardized our reputation, and it's created unnecessary suffering because we didn't implement, you know, the strategy, right? I mean, as you know, all of you as business people, hey, you can write anything you want down. You can have a beautiful plan, but if you can't get it done, right? What good is that plan? It's no good. So what we had identified over multiple administrations is that there are 3 key tasks to be able to prevent and respond to a biomedical emergency like this pandemic. The first of these was improved global surveillance and to be able to stop an epidemic before it becomes a pandemic, right? You saw us do this with Ebola, for example. But of course, this failed largely because of the Chinese Communist Party, the suppression of news of human-to-human transmission, the party shutting down internal transportation before international travel, and then of course persecuting, you know, the doctors and investigative reporters that were trying to ring the alarm bell about this growing epidemic in China. So that failed. So I mean, what we still need better surveillance. And you know, if we're going to rely on the World Health Organization for that, man, we're going to be in for another rude awakening. We've got to come up with our intelligence agencies. We need other organizations to focus on it because that organization has been subverted really and turned against its purpose in large measure by the Chinese. The second key aspect was to mobilize a biomedical response. This is where the biggest breakdowns occurred, and they broke down in large measure because of decisions made over many years, decisions that led to very fragile supply chains that were biased in favor of efficiency and cost effectiveness rather than resilience. Many of these supply chains had single points of failure, you know, in China in particular. And then also it broke down because we don't share authoritative and transferable data effectively across our healthcare system in particular, which is a combination, as you know, of various levels of government, federal, state, county, and local, and it's a mixture of a public and private system. And so not having a way to gain visibility or a way to manage procurement, for example, for critical supplies like PPE and pharmaceuticals and therapies led to this crazy situation where, you know, where everybody's bidding against each other, right? With these antiquated procurement systems. And that was a huge part of the frustration of the biomedical response. And then also you had a president, you know, who was sending, you know, really inconsistent, confusing messages to the American people that also I think impeded, to put it, I guess, mildly, you know, the measures in place to restrict the spread of the virus, you know, wearing a mask, for example. Okay. I mean, talk about something that should have been just a no-brainer, right? You know, and you can be all for not shutting down the economy in a draconian way, because we know who suffers from that, right? The people who don't have the luxury, you know, of working from home. And these tend to be people in lower income brackets who suffer the most. And, you know, I always thought it was kind of, you know, paradoxical that people sitting in the Hamptons, you know, on my Zoom calls, were so critical, about economies not being completely shut down when it didn't affect them, in any way. So I think there was an irrational kind of response, an inconsistent response, and this lack of coordination. And then the last task was, hey, we have to innovate. We need biomedical innovation to rapidly develop therapies, but also vaccines. I think that's where historians looking back are going to give this generation an A+, right? Because there were investments made over many years on rapid vaccine prototyping. mRNA vaccines are a new technology that was developed in large measure with defense research dollars, and then expanding vaccine manufacturing bases over years. And then the big decision was, it was the Trump administration decision to buy the vaccines up front, right? To remove that risk from the companies. I mean, that was a watershed decision. So what should we learn? We have to improve our ability to coordinate a biomedical response. We need consistency of message. We need more resilient supply chains, and we need to address, so the unequal access to healthcare that exists in underserved communities. And I think, Kate, while we're at it, why don't we address, access to education as well? And I think there's a lot of work that we have to do as we emerge from really quadruple crisis of a pandemic, a recession, the social and racial divisions laid bare by George Floyd's murder in the aftermath, and anger over unequal treatment under the law, and inequality of opportunity, and of course this vitriolic partisan political experience that we've been through that culminated in the assault on the Capitol in January, right? So we have a lot of work to do. Rotary, come on now, President.
Well, we got a lot of work to do. We can't do all of it, but
we all have a piece of it. We all
have a piece of it. Yeah. Could you talk about the tension between the military and foreign aid?
Yeah. Well, I think that there shouldn't be any tension at all between that, right? Because I think really what you want to do is always address the drivers of violence and conflict. If you're only treating the symptoms, if you don't mind me using a George Clinton quote, not a Bill Clinton, but a George Clinton Parliament Funkadelic quote. If you don't like the effects, don't produce the cause, right? And so I think when we're looking at defense strategies and capabilities, those ought to be wholly consistent, with what we're doing from an aid perspective, because what we're doing from an aid perspective ought to be able to address the political and the economic drivers of conflict, and hopefully prevent violence in future. And there are many examples of this, but it's in countries in which the people feel like they have a say in how they're governed, right? I mean, then they don't have to resort to violence to advance and protect their interests. If there's rule of law, they don't have to fall back onto some kind of tribal group or illegal armed group for protection, right? So institution building, sustained development efforts over time, I mean, they're not just altruistic, right? They are, but they're also consistent, I think, with foreign policy goals and objectives.
Could you talk about the situation in Yemen? Will the pullout of our support for the Saudis make a difference?
Yeah. Right. I'll tell you, I think we should have done almost the opposite. Okay. So what we did for a long time is we were in the worst of both. We had the worst of both worlds, right? We were kind of supporting the Saudis and the Yemenis, but not enough to provide the kind of oversight and the kind of intelligence and surveillance that would help them fight that war consistent with what St. Thomas Aquinas would want, right? And Jus and Bello, theory and just war theory, which is to apply firepower with discrimination, right? And with proportionality. And so what we did is we enabled the Saudis and the Emiratis, but of course, there were egregious losses of civilian life associated with some of their strikes in particular. Remember the school bus strike this about 2 years ago and so forth. But now what we've done is we've disengaged completely and said, hey, we're disengaging because we want to end the conflict. Well, guess what? Again, our disengagement doesn't end that cycle of violence there. And that cycle of violence has to do with, the forces supported by the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Houthis who are supported by the Iranians. the Houthis at this stage represent the greatest threat to the Yemeni people through the perpetuation of this humanitarian catastrophe there. So, it's funny, I think for some people in the new administration, I'm not a partisan person, so I don't mean this as a partisan criticism. I don't know why, but they've got a soft spot for the Iranians. I'll tell you. I was fighting against Iranian proxies in Iraq. I have no soft spot for them, man. So maybe I'm on the opposite side of this. But they've been talking in the administration about Shia-supported rebels in Yemen. No, that's a religion. That's not what's supporting the Houthis. It's Iranian supported, Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps supported. So what I would have liked to have seen is making our withdrawal from support from the Saudi Arabians and the Yemenis contingent on some sort of a negotiation process that uses our muscle, right, to be able to end the cycle of conflict. George Shultz, who we sadly lost here at Hoover earlier in the year, he once said that negotiation is a euphemism for capitulation, unless the shadow of power is cast across the negotiating table. And I think we forgot this in Afghanistan. How does this work, right? You tell the Taliban, hey, we're leaving, but we want to cut a deal on our way out. That doesn't work, right? The same in Yemen. We need to be competent, and I write about this extensively in Battlegrounds. We need to integrate all of our instruments of power and efforts of like-minded partners. And that means whatever we're doing militarily ought to be complementary, to what we're doing diplomatically, not run at cross purposes, which is how we've been doing it lately.
Well, what is your take on President Biden's outline, his plan for American troops to withdraw from Afghanistan by September 11th? What do you?
It is a political and a security and an ethical and moral disaster. And of course, it's a continuation of a policy under the Trump administration that was a political and moral and ethical and security disaster as well. And again, it is really based on self-delusion. In Afghanistan, we've conjured up the enemy we would prefer to fight rather than the actual enemy that we're fighting. And the Afghans are going to pay the price for this. And I think as we learned in the Syrian civil war, right, problems that develop either in the Middle East or in South Asia, in this case, they don't adhere to Las Vegas rules, right? They don't stay there. They result in security problems more broadly. In this case, in the Syrian civil war and in violence in Afghanistan, those wars destabilized Europe, right? As with the refugee crisis that helped impel the rise of nativist parties and a fragmentation of polities in Europe. It led to ISIS, right, being able to recruit effectively from Europe and return alumni back to Europe, countries that we don't require a visa to travel to the United States, by the way, which increases our vulnerability to terrorist organizations. So I think that we're going to be bearing witness now to a humanitarian catastrophe. And why are we doing it? Because we talked ourselves into self-defeat, right? We have lost very few soldiers there. Any soldier loss is a tragedy, but the Afghans have been bearing the brunt of the fight. We've been enabling them with 2,500 soldiers. That is a minuscule number of soldiers, and the cost of the annual cost would be down to probably $12 to $14 billion a year, with the Europeans putting more of the bill and providing about 3 times more of the troops. So in terms of burden sharing and so forth, it was sustainable. Hey, now the problem is, Afghanistan is not going to be Denmark, right? That's sort of the bar some people set. It's never going to be Denmark, but it doesn't need to be Denmark. It just needs to be Afghanistan. And what is, I think, most abhorrent about what we've done across these last 2 administrations now, initiated in the Trump administration, is we in effect partnered with the Taliban against the Afghan government on our way out, and put the Afghan government in a position of relative weakness. Hey, if we just wanted to leave, we should have just left, right? We actually are empowering the Taliban on our way out with this kind of delusional idea, that they're somehow reformed and they're disconnected from Al-Qaeda and other groups when they are demonstrably intertwined with them.
General McMaster, I want to switch the scene a little bit. It says Latin America, one question we got from Isaac Reed. He says Latin America is often an afterthought in the hot discussions of foreign policy, overshadowed perhaps rightfully by China, Russia, and Middle East, etc. Yet it is closer and bigger in some ways, and geographically at least, and perhaps culturally more impactful on the U.S. What are your thoughts about the future of U.S. policy toward Latin America?
Yeah, I think we need a concerted approach to the hemisphere that takes really a top priority, focus within the administration. It's long overdue. I think we're riding on a period of almost unprecedented success in terms of U.S. hemispheric relations broadly, with some exceptions, obviously, Cuba, Venezuela, but even other countries that were problematic for us, Bolivia and Ecuador had been moving back toward a much more friendly relationship with the United States. Mexico's a bit of an outlier there. Lopez Obrador he's a stingy socialist. I mean, I don't know how that works. But he has a different worldview, a different perspective that may impede economic relationships, and certainly impeding economic growth within Mexico. And of course, you have the continued problems in Central America, centered on the catastrophe of organized crime and narcotics trafficking in Guatemala and Honduras. How this group is becoming more powerful there, and in Mexico, as well as a hostile, on its way to a failed state in Nicaragua, and a country with a cult of personality now in El Salvador. So, I mean, it's a very dynamic situation in the region, but we can't take what had been for a long time really good relations with the vast majority of the countries. And I would say, Colombia obviously at the top of the list, but also Chile and Brazil. Bolsonaro's again his own unique situation there. But Argentina under Macri. But I think what you see now with these elections, right? There's going to be four elections in a row here, that you see a tension between really far left and far right parties. They're moving to the polls, kind of like we are here, which is is sad for us. But people in the region are discontent. I think you see this playing out in Peru right now, for example, in the Peruvian election. I think you see it playing out in Chile to a certain extent, and in Colombia as well, with the election, which is next year in Colombia. So I think that what we need to do is do the best that we can to reinforce the development of democratic institutions and free market economic systems that don't privilege the very few, and really create an even greater income disparity that is leading to a lot of the discontent in the region. So economic policy, the USMCA, I think, is very positive in terms of the Mexico relationship. Implementing that, this could be the right time to do it, right? Because everybody's talking about more resilient supply chains, right? Reducing reliance on China as a single point of failure. We need to really look at, if we transition to more renewable sources of energy, hey, where the heck do we get, where do we get the rare earth metals? Where do we get, where does the battery manufacturing occur? Where right now China's got a lock on all that. So what we're doing now is we're on a path, actually right now, to trade the oil dependence on the Middle East of the 70s to a renewable dependence now on China. That would be a bad thing for sure. So I think the hemisphere is a big part of the answer to that dilemma. And then, of course, I think a big focus on the hemisphere has to be on Cuba, and maybe an eventual transition there. It's great that Raul Castro's stepping down, but the army's still in charge there, 100%. And then Venezuela, of course, is a catastrophe. And I think we ought to be working on isolating Maduro, from sources of external support, the Cubans, the Russians, and the Chinese, and the Iranians, by the way, in particular. So, yeah, I'm sorry. There's a lot to talk about in the hemisphere. It's a broad question, but if we don't talk about it enough, we don't focus on it enough. I tried to invigorate it when I was there, but you're right. I mean, what happens is other things take priority.
We're trying to have the balance. So we have the European influence, and we have this current hemisphere influence too, with the Latin American countries. The U.S. has been at war 227 out of 245 years. Is endless war actually an integral and intentional part of our foreign policy and economic strategy?
No.
That's the question.
No. So, you know, I know this is part of this realist narrative. It's a narrative of the new left interpretation of history. It's what a lot of our young people get taught now in academia, in curricula that I think are at least, you know, tainted by a mild form of self-loathing, since in the post-Vietnam period, in particular. And of course, you know, we've made mistakes in foreign policy that have led to unnecessary armed conflicts. And I think there are arguments to be made, certainly, you know, that that the way we went to war, in fact, I'm one of the people who's made this argument, in Vietnam, was dysfunctional in terms of an utter lack of a strategy, but also fundamentally dishonest. And Lyndon Johnson and his administration deliberately circumvented the Constitution of the United States in decisions that transformed our involvement in Vietnam into an American war, which was not only, you know, unconstitutional and undemocratic, but it removed what could have been maybe an important corrective to an unwise policy. I think on Iraq, of course, that has been the war that's dominated, as I mentioned, you know, these debates. Should we have done it? I think we need to debate more who the heck thought it would be easy. But we should also remember that Congress authorized the use of force in Iraq, and so we did go through, you know, a process that involved the people's representatives in that decision. The American public obviously became disenchanted with that war, and that's what happens in a democracy, is that you can sustain war efforts only if the people are willing to sustain the efforts. And so democracies, our democracy in particular, I think is less susceptible to endless war. And what it requires, what wars require, is a sustained commitment and will, which I think only comes from leaders being able to explain to the American people two fundamental aspects of any war. First of all, what is at stake? And second, what is a strategy that will deliver a favorable outcome, an outcome worthy of the risks taken and the sacrifices made at a cost that is acceptable? And I think multiple administrations have failed to do that in both the Afghan war and the Iraq war, and also more broadly in the fight against jihadist terrorist organizations. And we've taken for granted our ability to sustain it, I think in large measure because we have a much smaller professional armed force these days. That's another kind of conversation. But, you know, I think it's important to kind of remember what G.K. Chesterton, you know, the British or the English theologian and philosopher said. He said, you know, hey, war is not the best way of settling differences, but oftentimes it's the only way to ensure they're not settled for you. So when people talk about an endless war in Afghanistan, I think it's very important to point out that we only attacked into Afghanistan to unseat the Taliban after the most devastating terrorist attack in history. And I think if you look at other military interventions, I think Bosnia is a great example. Kosovo is a great example. We didn't have any selfish aims there. I mean, what we did is we ended humanitarian catastrophes that probably would still be going on if we had not intervened. And I think you can look at other instances when we did not intervene. I think the Rwandan genocide is an example. When we regretted it afterwards, right? So I think you have to look at each one of these discrete circumstances on their own terms, and evaluate it with a clear-eyed view of what is at stake in this conflict, an assessment of the degree to which we do have influence or agency over the future, we being ourselves and like-minded partners, and make better decisions, improve our strategic competence is what I write about in the book.
Well, thank you so much for that. I got plenty more questions, but I don't have plenty more time. Thank you so much. Unmute everybody and let's give him a big round of applause for being our speaker for the day. You know, we have here, General McMaster, this year our club is making the homeless crisis in Oakland a priority. To that end, and as our gift to you for being our speaker of the day, in your honor, we are making a donation to support our unhoused residents in Oakland. Additionally, we would like to give you our Centennial Book, which documents 100 years of service and friendship in the third oldest Rotary Club in the Rotary world, Oakland Rotary #3. Again, thank you so much, Mr. Master, for being our speaker for today. And enjoy you. We got a couple more questions. We'd love for you to stick around after the end of our meeting, or some people might want to ask a few more questions.
Okay, President says, hey, thank you. Thanks to you, Dave, everybody. And I'm checking my calendar now, and I'll stick with you as long as I can.
All right.
Thank you so much. And thanks for the generous donation gift, and thanks for all the great works that you guys are doing. All you guys and girls are doing. Thank you.
Thank you as well for all the information you shared with us today. Past President, Speaker Committee Chair, will you, I guess it's Dudley, though. Dudley, tell us about our speaker next week. Excuse me. Past President, I'll make you President-elect, Dudley. Speaker next week.
Oh, we are meeting, first of all, we are meeting at 9 o'clock on Thursday morning. These two meetings may be a little bit confusing to people. The reason we're meeting is it's the First Five Collaborative, the First Five Rotary Clubs, and our guest will be the President-elect of Rotary International, who will be speaking, and then he will emphasize the new area of focus of Rotary, sustaining the environment. So we will also have guests from the Rotary Action Group and also our climate change initiative. I think San Francisco Club is presenting it. So please join us next week for the President-elect Shekhar Mehta of India, who will be with us. Thank you, President Sess.
Thank you. Now, Jim Bosnecker, you got cocktails with the president? Is that happening?
Thank you, President Seth. Yes. Hello, fellow Rotarians. Spring is here, so it is baseball season.
Ooh, go A's.
Go A's.
The Giants. I would like to invite you all to join President-elect Dudley Thompson next Thursday, April 22nd at 5:30 p.m. on Zoom to enjoy cocktails and celebrate the opening of baseball season. Wear your favorite team's colors. Wait a minute.
Wait,
are we doing it? I got it. It's backwards, but you get the idea. Bring your favorite game time beverage.
Yeah.
And your favorite snack. That's peanuts if you can't see. We will enjoy each other's company, share baseball stories, and have a baseball trivia contest. So remember, Thursday, April 22nd at 5:30 p.m. Jesse will be sending out an email invitation with the link. Hope to see you all there. That's it.
Thank you so much for that. Next week, I guess that is the 22nd, is the Cocktails with President-elect Dudley Thompson. Thank you so much for being our speaker for today. And I'll end this meeting as we always do. And that's the way it went on the 5,336 Club meeting, April 14th, 2021 at Oakland Rotary number 3, the third oldest Rotary Club in the world. Everyone remember, Rotary opens opportunities for service above self. And for now, this meeting of the Rotary Club of Oakland is adjourned. I got the first question for you, Mr. General McMaster. I wanted to ask this one. This was one that was coming along there at the end, and I thought it was real good. How real is the threat of North Korea missile reaching the Bay Area, and are we prepared to respond?
Yeah, it's real. It's real, and we are developing missile defense capabilities, and have missile defense capabilities. There are missiles positioned in Alaska, for example, that would be the ones that would probably engage, an intercontinental ballistic missile coming from North Korea. But the question is, at what point does North Korea really be able to have a viable capability with a miniaturized nuclear device and sufficient missiles maybe to overwhelm a missile defense, right? Which could happen in sometime in the future. We don't really know when that could happen. So, what do we do about it? I think what we have to do is we have to exert maximum pressure on North Korea, and under the thesis, and I wrote about this in the book, that we could convince Kim Jong-un that he's safer without the weapons than he is with them, right? And that's economic pressure. It's various other forms of pressure, and we've never really tested that thesis out. We did, thanks to Ambassador Nikki Haley, get into place some unprecedented UN Security Council sanctions approved, against North Korea, but those have never been really completely enforced. We can enforce them with secondary sanctions against companies that are facilitating illicit financial flows. We could go after North Korea, I think, more aggressively from a cyber perspective, especially against their cyber criminal activities. We could go against their ship-to-ship transfers of illicit goods, especially fuel transfers. I mean, the French Navy interdicted a ship. We haven't interdicted any yet, right? I mean, I think we've been pretty weak about that. And of course, we could still hold out, right? The prospect of rewards and so forth for the North, but we should not alleviate pressure until there's irreversible momentum toward denuclearization. I think any other approach kind of repeats the failed pattern of previous efforts. And hey, it may not work, but I think it's our best shot. And of course, we would want to try to convince China to do more. But we have a North Korea strategy, and China has a U.S. strategy, and wants to use North Korea as a wedge, to push us off the peninsula and out of Northeast Asia as the first step of isolating their regional rival, Japan. And so they're not going to really be super helpful, I don't think. They could solve the problem tomorrow if they wanted, because about 96% of the trade with North Korea flows across that border from China, and North Korea is wholly dependent. North Korea's got some real issues right now. First of all, I don't know how, I mean, you don't want to ever underestimate these dictators, right? Maduro is still hanging on and so forth. And, but this is the only hereditary communist dictatorship in the world. They rely on kind of a crazy ideology, this Juche ideology, which has turned deprivation into a virtue, for the North Korean people. And they've been hit hard, by COVID and floods and just, the nonsensical economic system they have in place, right? And so anyway, I think it would be a mistake to alleviate the pressure at this stage.
Okay. David Stein, our erstwhile Speaker Committee Chair, asked, short of having a perpetual military presence in places like Afghanistan, what are the options? Does sustained engagement include increased foreign aid?
Hey, what's wrong with the perpetual presence in Afghanistan? If it's 2,500 troops, it's enabling Afghan forces who are making sacrifices every day to protect the freedoms they've enjoyed since 2001. I just think we talked ourselves out of it, right? I mean, there are no short-term answers to long-term problems. And look at Korea. Okay, we're just talking about Korea. The situation in 1953, right after the Korean War armistice, looked pretty bleak. You had a country that was devastated by decades of war and brutal occupation. You had a corrupt government in charge of that country. You had a weak military. You had a country with no natural resources. I mean, there wasn't even maybe a tree standing left in South Korea, and you had an illiterate population. Okay, look at South Korea today, right? 5th largest economy in Asia, a thriving democracy. Of course, that didn't happen overnight, and there wasn't really the kind of progress, accelerated progress, until economic reforms in the 70s, and then eventually democratic reforms in the 80s. So, if you remember, we still now have 30,000 troops in South Korea, but into the 50s and into the 60s, we had well over 100,000 troops. I mean, 300,000 there through the 50s, and we actually took 3 times more casualties per year in South Korea during the intensified aggression by North Korea along the border and so forth in the late 60s than we have in Afghanistan in the last couple of years. So, I think in many ways we've just talked ourselves into defeat in Afghanistan. I really do.
I think the look is mainly just look. You got to look at it. If it's a small contingent, we can't be there for a long period of time. And if it's necessary, that's what's necessary.
Remember, Bill Clinton said, "Hey, we'll be in Bosnia for just only a year. I promise." Right? I mean, we're still there, man. We're still there. The Sinai peacekeeping effort, right? I mean, these are important to preserving peace and preventing war, right? And commitments, and I think that they ought to all be evaluated based on that. Is it worth it? I think maybe the way to think of it is it's an insurance policy in some ways. Against,
I'm gonna leave for other people to ask the questions, not me anymore. But I have to say, you are probably the most informed speaker we have ever had on this stage. Well, this stage is the Zoom meeting.
Okay.
But you certainly know your business. Whether or not people agree with you or not, it's another story. But you certainly know your business and you know what you're talking about. And we are proud to have you come here and speak at Oakland Rotary number 3. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm proud to be with you, President Sess. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. I have another 5 minutes for sure. So if anybody wants to jump
Anybody
in.
got any other question? Pipe up. You can go ahead and ask.
I think Robert Kidd has a question.
All right, Robert
You
Kidd.
need to unmute Robert. Robert, unmute.
Iran, you mentioned Iran. What about Iran? I mean, we now have Iran marching on toward nuclear capability. The Israelis now are trading punches. I mean, what? I just don't see any good outcome there.
Yeah, there's not a good outcome. And I think, you know, I think whenever we look at Iran, we tend to look at the latest, right? Like the latest, you know, attack, or, you know, maybe the latest incident associated, you know, with what was clearly an Israeli cyber attack on the nuclear facility in Natanz. Or, you know, they've been attacking, you know, ships with these limpet mines, you know, for example, in the Gulf, or the drone attack against Saudi oil fields, or the missile strikes against our base in Iraq, without looking at the context, right? And the context is the revolutionary ideology of the regime, that they really believe it, right? We tend to mirror image, right? And the big argument I make in the book is for strategic empathy. This is a term I borrowed from the historian Zachary Shore, who's at Berkeley and has written some great books, including this one, A Sense of the Enemy, which argues for strategic empathy. And they really believe in the ideology of the revolution, and the desire to export the revolution, and the desire to really gain preponderant influence over the Muslim world in particular, and to have hegemonic power kind of over the Arab world, and to threaten Israel with destruction. I mean, they really want to do that, you know. And the way that they're doing it is fighting a 4-decade-long proxy war against the great Satan, the United States, because they think the first step in them being able to realize these objectives is to push us out of the region. And then against the little Satan, Israel, who they want to wipe off the map. And the way that they're doing that is a sophisticated strategy to keep the Arab world perpetually weak by being enmeshed in a sectarian civil war. And so they support Shia proxy forces, who then act against Sunni communities. And then this is one of the reasons why jihadist terrorists are kept on life support, because then the Sunni communities view these terrorists as patrons and protectors of their beleaguered communities, right? And so this is what Iran has been doing in Lebanon. This is the Hezbollah model, right? Where you have a weak government in power, dependent on Iran for support. Iran builds illegal armed groups outside of that government's control that can be turned against that government if it acts against Iranian interests. They've done it in Syria. They've done it in Iraq. They're trying to do it in Yemen as well. So I think that what we need is a long-term sustained strategy to force that government to make a choice, right? You can either be accepted as a responsible nation and reap the economic benefits of being reintegrated into the global economy, or you can continue your 4-decade-long proxy war. But you can't have it both ways. And this is what the Iran nuclear deal did, is they allowed them to have it both ways. It gave them resources that they needed to intensify their proxy wars. The sanctions that are back in place on them now, and the economic isolation has forced them to constrain their efforts, right? They've cut their payroll to their proxy army in Syria by half, the stipend to Hezbollah by half. The collapse of the Lebanese financial system, which was utterly corrupt, put additional financial pressure on them. And there's growing discontent, you know, with the mismanagement of the economy by this corrupt order that's in place. So anyway, I think that what we want is a policy not to affect regime change like Iraq in 2003, but to encourage an evolution of the nature of the Iranian government such that it ceases its permanent hostility to the United States, Israel, and the Arab monarchies. And we ought to evaluate what we're doing with any deal, any agreement with them on that basis. Does it encourage that evolution, or does it discourage that evolution? And, I think we're in for a tough period with them because, they're not as isolated as they used to be. China's buying a million barrels of oil a day, just entered into a strategic partnership with them. And an election is coming up in which the hardliners are going to win. You know why? Because if you're not a hardliner, you don't get to run. You only get to run if you're going to be seen as supporting the clerical theocratic dictatorship, right? And so Rouhani's out. Okay, you're going to get probably somebody more like Ahmadinejad, an ideologue in there. And one of the reasons why you're going to get that kind of a guy as president is because Khamenei, the supreme leader, is getting advanced in years and he might not be around much longer. And so they want these revolutionaries. It's been a fight over years between the revolutionaries and the Republicans. I would argue, the revolutionaries won. They won. They're in charge in the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, the Supreme Leader, and the Guardian Council. And I think whoever comes in behind Khamenei will have to have very good credentials as a keeper of the revolution. Is that sustainable? I don't know. I think stability in Iran is a myth. Iran is not homogeneous. It's not monolithic. They are a rich culture with a very educated populace in the cities. I think we just have to play a long game there, but really force them to make a choice, not allow them to have it both ways. The JCPOA stuff now, like with trying to bring it back, it reminds me of the kind of the dark comedy Weekend with Bernie. Remember that? And they're trying to they're posing with Bernie to make sure to give the impression he's still alive, or through the weekend. Hey, the JCPOA is like Bernie, man. It's dead. It's dead. And it's dead because the sunset clauses are already kicking in, and and the Iranians are already violating it, right? They just said again today, hey, we're going to enrich uranium to 60% to restart the nuclear weapons program that we said never existed, right? How do you trust these guys? So anyway.
We got one more question from Stephanie. I believe you had a question, Stephanie.
Oh, I did. I was just curious how the extremism in the military, is that affecting our reputation worldwide, or will it affect our ability to defend democracy?
Hey, we've got a lot of problems in the world. That's not one of them.
Okay.
I think it's statistically insignificant. There are extremists. There are people who come into the military with all kinds of baggage. Different prejudices and predilections. On maybe an extreme. But they encounter a culture that is fundamentally intolerant of bigotry, racism, and extremism. And that's not to say it all just melts away and then everybody's fine. But those who exhibit that kind of behavior and exhibit those kind of beliefs, they get weeded out. They get chaptered out of the army, right? And when you look at the statistics, there is a greater chance of being struck by lightning, right, than to encounter an extremist, of any form in the military. And this is not to say that it's not a problem at all, but the military has been able to cope with it. What I'm worried about, this is like another whole topic, right? But I'm worried about if the military adopts the approach that academia has taken to dealing with race, for example, I think we're in trouble. I think that we will destroy our institutions. And in particular, what I'm talking about is the aspect of critical race theory that advocates for people being judged mainly by their identity category, right? And managed mainly by their identity category. The strength of our Army comes from the fact that you evaluate the man or woman next to you based on their common commitment to our ethos, to our mission, to one another, and what they bring to the organization, regardless of race, color, creed, sexual orientation, right? And when you're in a fight, and bullets are coming your direction, you're not checking anybody's political registration card, or like what religion or skin color, right? And that's that kind of cohesiveness, that kind of really the way that a military family, a good military unit takes on the quality of a family. That's the real power of our military. And I'm afraid that the application of this kind of approach to race that is inconsistent with Dr. King's aspiration for us that we will judge one another by the content of our character rather than the color of our skin. I think that's destructive, and I think it's as destructive as as a white supremacist kind of ideology. And so both of them we have to be fundamentally intolerant of these kinds of ideologies that drive us apart from each other, and I think mask our common humanity and our common identity as Americans. Not that we can't celebrate our individual cultural and racial and ethnic identities. We should. Not that we shouldn't be sympathetic to minorities, because they have to overcome more and more obstacles, because it still matters. The zip code that you're born in, how many obstacles you have to overcome to take part in the great promise of our country, right? These are all problems that I acknowledge. But man, when I look at kind of the way, some of this critical race theory is applied, in universities in particular, and now, I mean, in our popular discourse, I think it's a lodestone around our necks. I think it's setting us back,
All
Thank you.
right, thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here with us today. I'll mute everybody for a minute and let everybody clap for him.
Bravo. Hey, thanks,
Bravo.
President Sess. Thanks to all of you. Real pleasure to be with all of you. And I hope to be able to meet you all in person here soon. Take care, everybody. Stay well.
Thank you for your time.
All right.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
your time. Appreciate it. This meeting is finally over.